Ameer Shahul is the author of this book called Vaccine Nation for fact check, which is very important in relationship to vaccines. His book, 400 pages, is followed by 58 pages of references. If you want to question anything that I am going to say, you can email me at puliyel@gmail.com and I will send you the reference. Okay, to start with, Shahul, why did you call this book Vaccination? Because we have kind of retrofitted various vaccines, sold them at a price which is a fraction of the cost in the West. But the UNICEF says that our immunization status is worse than that of Bangladesh, Bhutan, and many other countries in Asia. So why did you call this book Vaccine Nation?
Thanks everyone. Thanks, Dr. Puliyel. It's a interesting, aspects of the book as to how did we name this vaccination. In fact, when we were naming the book, titling the book, there were various other consideration. But then we realized that it is the history of India's vaccine research, immunization, vaccine politics, and covering almost about 2 centuries of what happened in vaccine in India. So there wasn't any better name we could think of. The way from the in the 1800s to the current periods, how the vaccine history, vaccine journey has happened for India. So I think there wasn't any better name we could choose for the book as a title. Yeah.
Well, the play of words on vaccination and vaccination is a very clever play of words.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. To start with, what exactly is a virus, and how do you get immunity, and what are bacteria? Would you want to tell us, or you want me to tell about that?
So Dr. Puliyel is one of the foremost pediatricians of Delhi. If some of you have not familiar with him, in fact, while writing the book, I was trying to reach out to him, to get his inputs. In fact, he fought a very interesting litigation during the COVID period in the Supreme Court of India on consent, which is the fundamental issue of how consent should be obtained before vaccinating. And also, you must have seen the kind of forced immunizations which were happening in the country, against will of the people. So, so he's a very authoritative, vaccinologist, epidemiologist, pediatrician of the country. So I think, sir, you would be better person than me to explain the microorganisms to the audience.
Thank you for that. Virus is not, I mean, it's just a chain of an RNA or or a DNA. It is not alive in as much as it cannot reproduce. So the virus has to enter other cells and order the cell to make copies of itself. So that's a virus. It's hardly a living organism in as much as it cannot reproduce. It has to order other cells to reproduce it. And then when it has filled up the cell, it bursts through, goes to other cells, and does the same thing. Now, in our body, when we have foreign agents come in, the body recognizes that as a foreign agent and produces antibodies to those viruses. And that is why if you have chickenpox or something, for a week or two you suffer, but then once you've developed antibodies, you will recover and you will never get that again. Whereas a bacteria against which antibiotics, etc., work are entire cells, full cells. They can reproduce themselves, and antibiotics work in their case. Now, for immunity, a virus infection can stimulate immunity, But we have realized that if you take a killed virus, you take the virus, put it into formalin, it's inactive completely, and then inject that, the body is able to recognize that as a foreign agent and produce an antibody to it. And when the real live organism comes, you are protected from it. And that's the basis of vaccines. Now, these dead organisms are not that effective in stimulating the immune system. So then we add adjuvants like aluminum and polysorbate, etc. And these have their adverse effects. Now, then they came up with the idea that it's possible to uh, culture these viruses in other foreign cells, and it kind of makes them less active. It's called an attenuated virus. Now, these live attenuated viruses don't produce infection, but they are able to stimulate the immune system better than killed vaccines. The problem, of course, is that sometimes, like we had in polio, it can revert back to the virulent form and you can get the disease. From this, we graduated on to what are called subunit vaccines. Only a part of the virus is enough to stimulate the antibody. And say the polysaccharide outside Hib virus can be mixed with, say, tetanus toxoid, and you can get antibodies which protect you against H influenza B. Or a bit of the surface antigen on the hepatitis B is enough to stimulate hepatitis B immunity without ever having the risk of having the infection. So this is how vaccines have evolved. Okay.
And then you also need to mention about the DNA vaccines and the modern mRNA and the circular RNA, the new technologies in vaccine development.
Yeah, well, then came the stage of genetic modifications. So we have learned that we can insert the gene for a particular agent within another cell, and the cell can make copies of that gene. So now hepatitis B, for example, if you take a piece of that gene for making hepatitis B surface antigen and introduce it into yeast cells, the yeast cell begins to produce the surface antigen, hepatitis B surface antigen. So, and because the yeast cell reproduces so rapidly, you can have drumfuls of hepatitis B produced overnight, hepatitis B surface antigen, and you can use that for vaccines. Then came the stage of the viruses which are harmless, which you can put in this gene, and then it comes as a viral infection to humans. For example, the chimpanzee adenovirus is harmless for humans, but you can get that, you can insert a gene for, say, the spike protein of coronavirus, so that you get an infection with this harmless virus, which produces antibodies to the coronavirus. And then finally, we've reached the stage where you don't need any other infection. The messenger RNA itself can be programmed to produce the spike protein of the coronavirus. And when the body is producing this spike protein, the body produces antibodies to that. Of course, there are problems with all these mRNA vaccines, for example, can go to various parts of the body. When the body recognizes that it is invaded by a foreign cell, it destroys the cell. And so all these harms that we know of are also possible with all these vaccines.
So you've been very critical about the way the COVID vaccines have been administering in our country. And you've also raised some very serious concern about the trial data of some of our vaccine development, especially on the COVID vaccines. So what was the reason that forced you to get into a litigation on the corona vaccine scenario and the immunization, forced immunization in our country?
Uh, the coronavirus was a big disaster where vaccine trials were concerned. They condensed the entire trial to a few months, and even there, they suppressed information that was clearly available, and which is why when they introduced this vaccine, many people have had developed adverse effects, heart attacks, clots in the brain, etc., a very young age, caused by the problems created by the spike protein. So, in any case,
But there's been, two sides of the story. People opposing the theory behind that, and also people supporting it. So, what's the real scientific foundation for a statement like that?
well, the people, by and large, vaccines are considered safe and effective, and anything that is named vaccine is considered by a large group of people as safe and effective. But that's not always true. And there has been a lot of suppression of adverse effects, saying that if these adverse effects are known to the public, it will cause vaccine hesitancy. And so they don't inform the public about the possible side effects. And then when you get the side effect, you don't know that it is related to the vaccine. And when it gets out, it leads actually to a loss of confidence in these health agencies and therefore real vaccine hesitancy. So, I mean, the problem with the with the coronavirus, the trials were not complete, but they gave the license under emergency use authorization. When you introduce something in an emergency which has not been fully tried, the least you can do is to make it voluntary. But there was an attempt to make it mandatory. And that was definitely not legal. And that was why we went to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court upheld the fact that bodily autonomy is something which is enshrined in the Constitution. And for, say, a big public health emergency, you may introduce vaccines, etc. But in this case, this was a vaccine that did not prevent person to person spread. And there were all these doubts about their adverse effects. And therefore, it was said that you could not mandate the coronavirus vaccine.
So, in fact, in my book, I was in really getting into the controversies as such. I tried to anecdote a few anecdote a few stories, and how the vaccine development has actually happened into both in the case of Covishield as well as in Covaxin. Um, and also we've seen the mRNA vaccine, which is which is again completely a Western vaccine, which was also coming under scrutiny, very very serious scrutiny across the world. We talked about mRNA being a safe platform. So how is it and where is it coming from?
Yeah, I was just wondering whether instead of taking it down this line, whether we should go back to your book.
Sure. Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
you write about smallpox vaccine and how right in the beginning, in those days when we didn't have a cold chain, when we didn't have vials, etc., how the smallpox vaccine traveled over the oceans, transmitted from one person to another volunteer, and was brought all the way to India. You want to describe what you've written in your book?
Yeah, I think the earliest vaccines, if you know, um, these were not the kind of vaccines which we are seeing today. Even the terminology which were used were variolation. It's not vaccination. Vaccination came much later. So one of the challenges was to get the vaccine across to the people who wanted vaccines. And also distance was a great challenge during that period. So the techniques which was employed was inoculate a person with the material, vaccine material, and then from that person that person travels a distance and then pass it on to another person. So this is how the earliest vaccine itself was getting moved from person to person, region to region. So which was a smallpox vaccine, as Dr. Puliyel mentioned. And in fact, if you look at many other vaccines also in the 17th, 18th century, adopted the same kind of technique. Then we had the cholera, plague, and many other vaccines which came in, the bacterial and the viral vaccine. So I think vaccination as a method, a technology as employed today, um, is very recently evolved. If you look at it's probably about 100 years or less. Um, and if you look at the technology of the vaccines further in terms of the injectable vaccines, oral vaccines, so it's dramatically changed over the last 100 years, and especially in the last 25 years.
Yeah, and then about vaccine testing, you write about the polio vaccine, which Salk tested in 600,000 volunteers, all with informed consent, before he gave it out to the general public. So, I mean, that was the kind of testing that the original vaccines underwent. I mean, it contrasts with what we have done, say, with the rotavirus vaccine, where we tested 4,500 children, and then when there were adverse effects, that data in Vellore was not disclosed, and the vaccine was rolled out, and that kind of kind of cheating that has happened subsequently doesn't follow the original tradition of very careful science that followed. But now we have reached a stage where we are so confident or overconfident about these things that we seem to brush most of these harms under the carpet. Now, would you want to tell us about the Qatar incident, sudden infant death syndromes, the antibody dependent enhancement, etc.? The Qatar incident,
right? Yeah. I think this is a very um, ignored part of the vaccine story. Um, in many countries, in most of the countries, advanced countries, and in India also, we have a system where the side effects has to be reported immediately to a central point. And unfortunately, this become a part of the process, and it is not rigorously monitored or followed up with. The whole history behind that goes back to Hafkin, one of the pioneers of Indian vaccine development, Hafkin. And Hafkin, when he was administering the vaccine, apparently a contamination happened in the vaccine administration, and almost about 20 people, 19 people died because of lockjaw infection. So, and then over the next 25, 50, 30 years, similar incidents happen. Over the next 50 years, similar incidents happens across the world, including one of the very big incident, which is called the Qatar incident, where a large number of people died because of an infection. And it actually started making people think, especially the researchers and the scientists think, how can we prevent this? Is there a way we can document it and try and kind of distill the process? So that is how this AEFI, as we call today, that came into existence, and many countries make it part of the testing process, and it is followed even beyond the testing and during the deployment. So it is, I know the idea was to avoid reduce the number of unwanted incidents related to the vaccines.
Yeah, and we spoke about how 600,000 children were tested before the polio vaccine was introduced. But one batch of that vaccine was not, it's an inactivated vaccine, was not fully inactivated, and 200 children developed polio from the vaccine. 10 children died, and that was part of the Calcutta incident. Now, as we have developed vaccines, there are so many of them to be given to the children that they have decided to mix various vaccines together. So we have the triple antigen, which is diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis or whooping cough. You add H influenza B and hepatitis B to it, and you have the pentavalent vaccine. And as you add more and more vaccines and give them together at a younger and younger age, some children are developing what they call sudden infant death syndrome. They're perfectly well in the before they go for the vaccine. They come, they are a little cranky, put to bed. In the morning, they are found dead. Now, these reports don't get reported widely enough because they say that will cause vaccine hesitancy, but they have to be acknowledged. Even in spite of testing the dengue virus, for example, they developed a vaccine widely tested, well tested. Uh, they found that antibodies were produced to all the 4 strains of the dengue virus. And then when it was rolled out among children who had never had dengue before, the antibody actually caused more reactions in those who were vaccinated than those who were not vaccinated. So it's called an antibody induced enhancement of the disease. So these kind of problems are there in spite of testing. And therefore, if you don't test properly, well, you're going to multiply that several fold. And that's what we did with the COVID vaccine. Okay, Shahul, you talked about disruptive pricing with Indian vaccines. Can you talk more about that?
So, one of the good example of vaccine, innovative vaccine development, which was followed up by disruptive pricing, was in the case of hepatitis B vaccine, which also turned out to be the first genetically modified vaccine produced by India by an Indian company. And the company, realized, in fact, at that point in time, the company was, coming across heavy pressure from the multinational corporations. 2 of the large corporations, in fact, were, one of the largest pharma giants in the world. So who were trying to undercut a new entrant, which is producing the vaccine, developing and then producing the vaccine in India. And the gentleman who was behind the vaccine manufacturing, vaccine production, the vaccine company, he tried to give it back to the US giants, and he realized that I can sell it for 50 rupees. When the US company was selling it for 500 rupees, 2,700 rupees, at that range. So I think in that decade, if you look at in the decade of 1990 and 2000, the vaccine prices have crashed dramatically. And many of the vaccine which were used in the national immunization program were few rupees. In fact, you would be surprised. It will be, the government procurement price for a vaccine was 1 rupee, 2 rupee, 10 rupee level. And so the pricing for a country like India, pricing was a price point was very important. And because of the crashing of the prices, government could deploy it in large scale, and also our people could afford it in a large population, almost about 27 to 30 million newborns every year. So at any given point in time, we were giving 6 to 12 vaccines, some of them part of the national immunization program, and voluntarily deployed vaccine. So I think the pricing is very important. Even today, pricing is an important factor. We probably don't know it because the government is procuring and giving it part of the national immunization programs.
Yeah, I mean, what Shanta Biotech did with the hepatitis B is that he introduced it into a different type of yeast. So the foreign company was patented the yeast in which they had made copies of the hepatitis B surface antigen. Shanta Biotech decided to put it into another yeast cell and that became his patent. And he was able to produce the vaccine at this price of $1 instead of $23. And because of that competition, the price now for hepatitis B vaccine is 23 cents. What was being sold at $23. Yeah, now you want to tell us about Biotech's Krishna Ella's hepatitis B vaccine and how he kind of introduced a vaccine without testing, without ethical approval, without regulatory approval.
Yeah, so that's an interesting part of the book. In fact, many of you probably don't know about the dubious history of Bharat Biotech, which I was trying to unravel in the book to some extent. And in fact, some of which were very known and well documented in Andhra Pradesh, where the company originally hailed from, and which later became Telangana and Andhra Pradesh. And if you read through the book, you could realize that Bharat Biotech was always patronized by big political groups, where at some point in time by Chandrababu Naidu's party, and later the current ruling party in Delhi. So while Shanta Biotech, the first company to produce hepatitis B vaccine, strived a lot to make the vaccine out, Bharat Biotech cut corners. In fact, they kind of picked up the Shanta Biotech vaccine from the market and then do a bit of re-engineering and then produce the vaccine in 9 months. And they, when he went to the press, when Bharat Biotech went to the press, he tried to give a different color by suggesting that I used a different yeast, and therefore, I am not in conflict with the Bharat Biotech, the Shanta Biotech vaccine. So I think that was a dark chapter, and also a point where we have this dubious vaccine companies started emerging in India. Some of them, unfortunately, is ruling the roost today in the country.
Yeah, so this vaccine by Bharat Biotech was not licensed by the government, but he still marketed it. And he did that without testing. So, I mean, we have that stage. And this is the same Bharat Biotech and Krishna Ella who has taken over the Indian rotavirus vaccine. Now, the rotavirus vaccine has been tested in just 4,500 children. And in the Vellore arm of that study, there were so many serious adverse effects where children had to undergo surgery that without disclosing the Vellore data, they went ahead and marketed the vaccine. So, and that is part of the national program now. So when you have politicians, government, etc., colluding with these kind of pharma, then you have a big problem. And we need to realize that. And if the public come to realize that, then we will have more accountability. Perhaps we can. Okay. Okay, staying with this, would you like to talk about GP Talwar's contraceptive vaccine?
Yep, yeah, I think it's another chapter in our glorious vaccine development. GP Talwar is a immunologist who started from the All India Institute of Medical Science, from the setting up of the All India Institute of Medical Science, who moved on to set up the National Institute of Immunology. And he, as part of his research, he started developing earliest vaccine for
human chorionic gonadotropin.
Yeah.
Human chorionic gonadotropin.
Yeah, HCGB. Yeah, so that is a piece of work which he started early developing it, and then some of his the researchers carried out with with a rigor, and then he by accident he found that the same thing can be used for used as a female reproductive prevention vaccine. So it was a new concept. How can you use how can you develop a vaccine to prevent pregnancy? So that's a very interesting idea he came up with, and he converted into a vaccine, and then there was a kind of an ethical dilemma whether you can do that or not. And of course, the policy makers in our country was a little hesitant, but he got the international support from Population Council and some of the global organizations, and he did an international study testing of the vaccine. Subsequently, at many years later, he realized that the same can be used as a cancer treatment, cancer therapy. So it moved on to become a cancer therapy, and it's currently under last stages of clinical trial. So the lesson I learned and I shared in my book is that you never know a real scientific development turned out into what kind of use and what kind of benefits for the patients or for the community.
Yeah. So what he did actually, human chorionic gonadotrophin is a hormone produced only at the time of pregnancy from the placenta. Otherwise, it's not produced in the body. This hormone is essential for continuing the pregnancy. Now, he took that hormone and combined it with tetanus toxoid. So, when an antibody is produced, it is produced not only against tetanus toxoid, but also against the human chorionic gonadotrophin. And so, if you have been vaccinated against this, you won't get pregnant. They say it is temporary, but they don't know how long it's going to last. And this vaccine was tested out as a tetanus vaccine in many parts of Africa without any consent, making several thousand women sterile. So this is essentially a very evil vaccine.
So I did miss that in my book.
Yeah, it's from the book. Whereas some of our, when we get, say, a lung cancer or a prostate cancer, breast cancer, sometimes, rarely, not always, that cancer cell produces human chorionic gonadotrophin. So it has been found that if you give this vaccine now, by the time you get cancer, you usually post-menopausal, and even men, if they are producing this human chorionic gonadotrophin in their cancer cell, if you give the vaccine, the antibody goes and attacks those specific cells that produce the human chorionic gonadotrophin, and therefore you have a revolutionary treatment for those types of cancers which are producing human chorionic gonadotrophin. So what was originally designed as a fairly evil vaccine has now found good use. Okay, while we are talking about uses or cancer vaccines, etc., do you want to tell the story of Alka Dwivedi and the Indian cart therapy?
Yep. So that's yet another story I try to document in the book. Cart therapy is a reasonably new therapy which is used for certain kind of cancers, and it's developed by a Israeli team and then tested in the US. A few companies came out with their versions and then FDA approved models, and it was very expensive therapy. It worked on an immunomodulation, therapeutic way, but it was an expensive therapy, and Indians couldn't afford. Obviously, what treatment would cost you about some 50 lakh upwards. So I think the Indian scientists were trying to figure out how they can probably work on that, and one team from IIT Bombay. So they had a very interesting, very young lady who came on to join the team, and they quickly teamed up with the Tata Memorial Hospital, and in couple of years they came out with they actually re-engineered the entire US model. The lady got a chance to work with some of the US institutes who were involved in the working of the model, and she came back and she got trained. She came back and she re-engineered the therapy in India, and she realized that, and her organization realized that, and they could offer it almost like 1/100th of the price of the US cost. So she's subsequently she formed a company with the same team which were involved in the IIT Mumbai, and today they're trying to offer it almost like 10,000 rupees per therapy, which is against 50 lakhs. They're trying to offer it at a cost of 10,000 rupees per therapy. Yeah, so that's a again a great lesson for innovation, which is from our country, and the innovation, how that innovation can become translational into an entrepreneurship, and which can eventually start offering something for the people at for affordable prices.
So yeah, this Alka Divedi came from a rural village in Muzaffarpur, UP. Very poor lady. She went on for training in immunology and found that this, in cancer, there are some special cells that go haywire and produce several copies of itself and cause cancer. And it is possible to take the patient's own T cells, which is one of the protective cells, which detect these abnormal cells and kill them off. So she was able to therefore train the patient's own T cells against their cancer. And that's what's called the CAR-T cell therapy. And that is now available in India at a fraction of the cost because of this very clever rural lady from Muzaffarpur. Yeah, and there are also immunotherapies, which are immunoglobulins, which are effective on some specific types of cancers, which is also part of this immunology revolution that helps us to treat cancers. So those cancers which are responsive to these immunoglobulins are cured completely. There's no need for a lot of radiations, no need for lots of chemotherapy. You can cure the cancer because it goes specifically to those cancer cells and knocks them out. Okay, would you like to say anything else?
No, I think cancer. As you know, it's one of the worst diseases humankind has ever confronted. Unlike other diseases and conditions, cancer, finding and as you know, cancer varies from organs to organ, region to region in the body. Um, so cancer in every part of our body has a different name because the way it acts within that organ is different. For the same reason, it's very next to impossible to find a common cancer vaccine. And in addition to that, there are some cancers which were in fact prompted by a virus infection or such cases. So the researchers have been working for decades to find a vaccine for cancer obviously, but is there a possibility to develop a universal cancer vaccine? So that's a question. Some of the scientists were involved right from IIC Bangalore to a Malayali lady who's working in the Duke University. So it's hope. We all hope that one day we will be able to find a universal cancer vaccine which can prevent all cancer cancer types which is affecting our body.
Okay, I've been asked that we should close and leave the time free for questions. In conclusion, vaccines are a major development in man's fight against disease and not only viruses but also cancers. But then, like all technology, it has adverse effects. We need to understand that. We need to have good regulation. We can't have vaccines and hide the study data like with the rotavirus vaccine. And we must not let the profit of large multinationals or Indian multinationals to take precedence over public health. Thank you.
I just want to ask you, a couple of important things. In fact, if we look at the whole vaccine spectrum, we're still left with some of the diseases, unchallenged. For instance, the AIDS. malaria, another example. So some of these diseases, despite we fighting for decades, still don't have a vaccine. So what's your thought on, sir? When will we find a vaccine for malaria or AIDS?
Well, I mean, we need not think of a vaccine solution for every problem under the sun. There are treatments for even for the COVID virus infection. There was ivermectin. There were chemical treatments which were more effective without producing any of these adverse effects. So we don't have to look for a vaccine for everything. And when there is a vaccine, we need to be careful that it's not producing other problems. But when there are vaccines, they have been fairly useful. But obviously, diseases like the AIDS, etc., are resistant to vaccine therapy as of now. Whether in the future we find some vaccine for it is left to speculation. We don't need to know everything, but we have fairly good treatments for these things. And now, if you have a vaccine for flu, for every small little thing, if you go and give a vaccine, it doesn't make sense. You have to have a disease which is bad enough to produce a vaccine. Otherwise, there's no point in taking a vaccine. You can have a cold and go away with it, do away with it in 2 days. You have a vaccine against chickenpox, which is quite unreasonable, because you can get chickenpox, get rid of it, and you can be protected for life. And not only life, but in women, their children are protected all during the early stages of their life. But a vaccine doesn't do that. So so we don't need to have a vaccine for every disease under the sun. That's okay. Shall we close here?
No, thanks. If anybody has questions,
Yeah, we
feel
have to
free
ask
to.
questions. Yeah.
Sir, any vaccine on the lines of Alka's version of Jugaad vaccine, Indian affordable vaccine. But as you said, it costs 50 lakhs or so in US, but it can be produced in a indigenous Indian version with only 10,000 rupees. What about the feature of Jugaad vaccine or affordable vaccine manufacturing? As in Madras IIT or in Bombay IIT, professors follow. That is my question. Affordable pricing in vaccine, just like in CART.
Which
The
vaccine?
Chimera antigen receptor vaccine. CART.
Yeah. So I think between the Western vaccine manufacturing and the Indian manufacturing, the Indian manufacturers, and not just in vaccine, anything which is produced in India crashes the price. And it also crashes the price when the production becomes large and the numbers become large, which means the volume production increases. So Indians are also very good in not just re-engineering, but in using technologies and techniques which are very local. So therefore, the prices can be much lesser. And in addition to that, the labor cost in India is very less, so that also help reduce prices of vaccine manufactured in India. And with the new kind of technologies coming in, AI and quantum computing coming in, we hope that the prices of many of the not just vaccines, many of the therapies would come down drastically.
Thank you. I'm I'm not a medical person, but I wanted to follow on from that question about global pricing of medications and vaccinations included. That I remember 15, 20 years ago in Southern Africa with HIV very high, that the conflict that was going on in access to medications and treatments, because India was producing and making available medications and treatments that were very effective and affordable, but there was a problem with the World Trade Organization and international pharmaceutical companies. And I'm just wondering, given, as I said, I'm not in the field, but with the impact of COVID having so heavily, I think the Western world was as much affected by COVID as anybody else. So I wondered whether, as a consequence of that, there's been some improvement in global trade arrangements that make it easier for India to sell into the international health sector rather than within national.
If you remember during the COVID crisis, there was international debate on technology transfer. In fact, India and South Africa together moved the global bodies for transferring the technology, the COVID vaccine technology, which was at that point in time under development, to all the countries, all the companies across the world, to produce it in a crisis situation, in a pandemic situation. But unfortunately, the developed world, the Western world, try to push it back, and they try to prevent it at any cost. And the negotiations went for years at the peak of pandemic. And the fear of the Western world was that we are producing we are developing the technology, spending billions of dollars. In fact, any drug or vaccine development takes years, and it costs anything less than 500 million and upwards. So they try to prevent it, and at every available vantage point, they pushed it. And by the time, and finally, there was a consensus almost after 2 years by 2020 end. But by the time the consensus was reached at the WTO and other global organization, WTO and WHO, so the utility of that technology transfer became null, and nobody ever used the technology. And even the technology which was offered by some of the countries some of the companies at that point in time was not availed by the company. So I think let's not forget that there is a global lobby at play, what we call the big pharma lobby, which was supported by the wealthy nations, the United States of the world, and they would try to protect the interest of the Western pharma, the global pharma. And in scenarios like this, when you have a pandemic, people need vaccines, people need therapies, and at some point in time, they wouldn't be able to pay for it. And one of the glaring example which I quoted in my book is that when the first vaccines for COVID were developed and started getting distributed, including the Pfizer Moderna vaccines. There was one country, in fact, one of the the earliest understanding at WTO was that equity of vaccines. You need to distribute vaccines to everybody around the world so that the spread can be prevented. But, there was one country, there are many countries which did not receive the vaccine, for many months and for years. In fact, there was one country which received 7 vaccines. Given by the Western. So this is how the poor, global South is being treated by the rich, Western countries. So it's a cause of great concern, and there is no immediate solution as of now.
Yeah, there's this profit motive. Originally, vaccines used to be discovered, studied and discovered in funded universities. Now, the big change came with Bill Gates and all, who transferred all this. They said there's no need, it's a waste of government money to pay money to universities to make vaccines. Let the private industry do it. And so when it became privatized, then they're only looking at their profit motive. For example, the polio virus, when it was when it was originally discovered and was marketed, when he came out for that press conference, they asked him, what is your charge of the patent? What's going to be your patent charges? And he said, you can't patent the sun. It is everybody's property. Now, from that philosophy, we have come to this privatized philosophy where we think that we have to regain our costs for having done all the studies, etc., and charge exorbitant prices. And that's not fair. So once we have moved from that university-driven research and privatized it, I think that was one of the reasons why this problem exists.
Sir, very valuable discussion, sir. Thank you for that. And my question is that whether we agree or not, vaccines are coming quite often, newer and newer vaccine. So what should be the fundamental principles or the mandatory things to be done before introduction of a vaccine in the universal immunization program, or for that matter, to any country? And second question also, what is the role of international organization in the issues in which you are all raised here? Role of international organizations like WHO or the UNICEF, many of the vaccines are for the children only. So what is their role in intervening in the issues which you referred here?
Okay. The question of what are the steps we must undertake for introducing a vaccine into a national program, they're fairly well known and well written up. It's only that we don't follow them. There is need for testing vaccines in the genetic population where it is going to be given, even if it's been tested elsewhere. And the test results need to be publicized. Adverse effects need to be publicized. Only then will we have the incentive to make better and better vaccines. And then after that, the next stage is, do we need this vaccine? Is the disease that is prevented causing enough of a problem that we need to vaccinate the whole population? If you're treating a person with a disease, you only treat that person. But to have a vaccine, you have to vaccinate the entire population so that that one person doesn't get that disease, or that 100 people don't get that disease. So you have to look at that cost benefit equation. So you have to see that the disease is bad enough to need a solution which requires vaccination of the whole population. Otherwise, if it's a mild illness, etc., we should learn that these things happen. And very often these kind of interventions can have more adverse effects. For example, the fact that introducing the chickenpox vaccine in women means that younger and younger children are getting chickenpox because the mothers have not got the disease and therefore are not immune and not passing on that immunity to children. So all these things need to be evaluated before you introduce a vaccine. Don't introduce it just because you have it. And then the question of which you ask about the role of these international agencies, etc. They are also funded entirely by the pharma. But if you look at WHO, US used to be the highest funder, the next was Bill Gates, and the third was all these pharma companies. So they will push, and you had Tedros saying that monkeypox, which affected a few people in Denmark, was a disease of international concern, which is like what he said for COVID, that everybody is going to likely to get it. So everybody, we need to look for a vaccine for it. So these organizations are prompted entirely by the funders. You pays the piper calls the tune. So anyway, now with the US having gone out of the WHO, probably they'll have less influence. But all these organizations are funded by the pharma and we can't trust them.
One question.
This is the last question.
Okay. Actually, all our discussions are around about human vaccine. There is other thing. Livestock vaccine is there. Foot and mouth disease vaccine, which is distributed all the of African continent is from India only. India is producing that thing and distributing in Africa, entire Africa. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, I think the veterinary vaccine is a huge area and a lot of research happening. Again, like Dr. Puliyel was mentioning, for everything you don't need vaccine. I think it applies to veterinary vaccines also. I'll just give you one example. It's a very interesting example. And I will close with that. In our community, when the cattle are dead, in the rural areas, the cattle dead bodies used to be thrown out in the open so that the vultures can come and eat it away. Similarly, the Parsis, when they die, they leave the dead body in the Tower of Silence so that the vultures can come and clear it up. And today, vultures is a bird which is at the top of the ecosystem, avian food chain. And in the year 2000, till the year 1970s, 1980s, we used to have almost like 10 to 50 million vultures in this region, in the South Asian region. Today, we have 10,000, not even 10,000 vultures. So vultures have disappeared, in the last couple of decades. How did this happen? It happened just because of a drug called diclofenac. Most of us use it for pain. And it is because of the veterinary use of diclofenac. And the vultures start, if 0.5 gram diclofenac end up in the body of the vulture, its kidney functioning fails and it dies. And in 2000, it's been going on for many years since the time diclofenac got introduced in the for the veterinary use. In the year 2005, when globally people got concerned and started, trying to figure out, a survey, a very systematic survey was conducted, and they realized that this is the cause. So for everything, we don't need to be, and especially for the veterinary, I'm not again. I'm an animal lover. That doesn't mean that we need to try to pump up all the human medicines into the veterinary use. So probably we don't need to do that.
Okay, I think the next session is coming in. Thank you all for your attention. Thank you, Ameer, for all your book and for everything that you said. Thank you, everyone.